We were followed by unmarked cars. We had lived in the same house for 5 years with never a helicopter over our house, and beginning at this time we had almost daily helicopter strafing, sometimes in the middle of the night so loud the windows almost broke from the activity, sometimes as many as 9 in a day, circling and circling our house. We began to have interference on our telephone calls, and never when we were talking about recipes or the family or work, but only when UFOs were the subject of conversations. We began to have tampering with our mail, and my daughter-in-law, future daughter-in-law at that time, who was an ROTC scholarship student and was in the process of getting out of the ROTC because of medical reasons, was at a point where she had to sign up a duty request when she graduated, and she was a physicist, studying physics at the time, and she needed to be near her medical specialist for her problem, which would give her only one choice of an assignment, which was meteorology. When she went to the ROTC sergeant on the campus and signed that she wanted to be attached to a meteorological base, the sergeant absolutely flipped out and said, "You can't do this. You're a physicist. Don't you want to sign up for the R&D work? Don't you want to work on the UFOs and find out what really is going on with them and not what the public thinks?" This from a sergeant in the Air Force to my daughter-in-law, who had never mentioned any of our activities to anyone other than us, except on the phone. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned something about the black helicopters, black unmarked helicopters.
Right.
I had read that as early as '84 about the black helicopters that seemed to be tailing UFO abductees and UFO researchers that had gotten too close to the truth. And I remember seeing something on hard copy. They were talking about the Escamilla family in Roswell. It's a hotbed of UFO. You can go on and see UFOs every day there. Basically, they're capturing on videotape. At one point, you see a black helicopter, and it instantly transmutes into a silver disc.
Oh yeah, we don't know if some of these we do know are military. In fact, we have video of them at bases on the ground. Some of them are, but others can be, for all we know, other kinds. Like I said, illusions, screens, deceptions. We've seen them be regular planes, helicopters, haystacks, buildings, vans, pickups, and then they transform. Right. So you can't take it face value. This is the lesson. We ought to have learned it a long time ago. We're just sort of fixed sometimes.
In one of the underground places that Angie recalls seeing was what she called the upturned helicopter, or the rotorless helicopter. And again, we have gotten reports from around the country over the, through the past of similar copter-type devices that apparently are not copters. And finally, Amy's drawing of some of the helicopter harassment that has plagued her and her family ever since she made contact with me and began working on exploring her case. And of course, many of us, including our family, have had this over and over and over. Amy's had a lot with the helicopters. Angie's had a lot with numerous military flights.
6:50 p.m., March 5. March 6, 3 p.m.
That's one of those crane helicopters with the crooked tail. Okay, Craig, that's all. Thanks.
I kept trying to force myself to get out of bed, but I was powerless. This voice rendered me totally powerless. And as this was going on, I heard what sounded like a helicopter come over the roof and stop. And I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker and paralyzed at that point. At the time that the helicopter came over, I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything at all. Then suddenly, as I was about to just fall into a deep sleep or pass out or whatever, suddenly I heard the helicopter fly away. And then this voice said, "Oh, that wasn't a helicopter. That was just an airplane with engine trouble." At that same point in time, My husband came flying into the house, flying into the bedroom, screaming, "Leah, are you okay? Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not okay. Why do you ask? You're supposed to be at work." And he said, what happened was he had started to work, and he had gotten some distance, and he had an upset stomach, and he had to come back home. And when he did, he caught the helicopter hovering over our rooftop, just right above the roof. And he made a rude gesture at it, and it flew away. So the point here is that he caught this helicopter, and I don't imagine it was a helicopter itself, because that's just a piece of machinery, but whoever was in that helicopter conducting mind control on me, rendering me powerless to move and do anything. Now, I don't know what the intentions were. You know, I don't know, because my husband caught it that day. A couple of weeks later, when the plant was shut down, my husband came home at the end of the day after a full day of work and caught one of those helicopters over the roof again. And I don't know what happened that day. I can't tell you what happened that day. I don't know. But again, the helicopter flew off. It probably got me that time, but I have no memory whatsoever of what happened that day. None. And that has happened quite a few times with me, is having periods of time where I have absolutely no memory of what occurred. It's extremely bothersome to know that there are days out of your life where you can't remember anything, and you wonder where you were, what you were doing. Did you do anything wrong? Did anybody do anything to you that could have permanent repercussions? You know, there's still so many unanswered questions. Even though I've had experiences myself, I still have lots and lots of questions that go unanswered. The black helicopters still buzz my house from time to time. Every once in a while they'll come in and they'll just circle right over it. And I've moved, by the way. You know, it happened when I lived in Mississippi, but not to my neighbors. When I've lived in 4 places in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is where I live now. Same thing. The black unmarked helicopters don't bother my neighbors, but in all 4 places I've lived in Murfreesboro since 1995, they've come and circled my house, flown right over my roof, hovered over my roof. And it has happened several times this year even. I think May 4th was the last time it happened. I've taken pictures of them some of the times. Let's see. There's one of them. There's one of them. And there's another one. So I've got pictures of the May 4th one too, I think, but I didn't get those slides developed yet, you know. I don't even see any point in it, you know. They all look the same, so there you go. I've traced these helicopters to 2 different places. When I lived in Mississippi, I discovered that they were flying off from and landing at Columbus Air Force Base in Columbus, Mississippi. Where I live now, I've seen them take off from and land at Smyrna, Tennessee Airport, south of Nashville. And I don't know who they belong to yet. I intend to do a little bit more research on these things. Don't know if I'll get any answers, but I'm certainly going to try to find out who owns these things.
Unfortunately, the story hasn't ended there for Betty. Bob Luca, Betty's husband, believes both he and Betty are continually being monitored by unusual flying objects, only this time it might be from our own government.
I couldn't help but notice that these aircraft were all black. They were totally unmarked. They showed no numbers whatsoever, and they flew at extremely low altitudes, all of which are illegal. It got to a point where even some of our neighbors were documenting these flights. So we thought, well, maybe it could be coincidence. Maybe we're just in a flight path. But within a year, we moved to another home in Cheshire, Connecticut. Within 2 days of the time we moved to Cheshire, Connecticut, these flights of helicopters started to come over our house, even did figure eights at altitudes sometimes less than 200 feet.
Oh my God, Mom, they're here. I said, who? What are you talking about? And she said, the black helicopter, it's here, it's above the house. Now, her boyfriend doesn't know anything about what's happened to us. He's never talked about strange stuff. I mean, you know, he's just a regular person who's never experienced anything. So he was apparently very freaked out.
Oh, I guess he would have been.
21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking up at this black helicopter, blacked out windows, no numbers, no signs, nothing on this helicopter. Everything's black, and it's a big one, and it's hovering like rooftop level, like where the trees are. In fact, when they went to take off, they nearly nicked the top part of a tree in the yard. So what are they trying to... So, of course, poor kids, they were terrified. They're going, who are these? What are these? What's going on? And I said, look, I'll take care of it. You just calm down. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. It's probably some of the police force doing a thing on maybe a drug bust or something near you.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
So, okay, that's all it is.
There you go.
Thank
that
you.
helps.
Okay, so they were calmed down. But I thought, I'm going to investigate this. I've had enough of this. So I went to a helicopter place that's on the west side here. And I went in and I said to the lady at the desk, I know this is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you a question. She said, sure. I said, do you own or have or run black helicopters with blacked out windows? Do you have such a thing? She kind of looked at me with a weird look on her face and this smirk on her face as if to say, oh boy, here comes another one. And I said, look, I know what this must sound like, but really I need to know. She said, we don't have any. And I said, well, what about Canada? And like do the Canadians somewhere else in Canada have something like that? She said, not that I know of. Not with where the glass is blacked out.
That's right, because they're themselves, they're dealing with pretty much commercial aircraft.
I said, well, what about, you know, the police force or something, if they're doing a drug bust or whatever? She said, no, those are black, or kind of a dark green color, but they have a see-through glass, and they usually have numbers or a name or something on the helicopter.
That's right.
And I said, well, who in the world runs these black helicopters? She says, the only ones I know of are the military, and they're from the U.S. And I said, thank you.
Right. Now, I've had reports from back in 2003, 2004. People, the Vernon area. Now, there's an old, I guess there's an Army base down there, and I guess it's not really being used much now, but I guess the cadets seem to do stuff out of there. I've heard at times there's been a lot of some top brass in there, coming in and out, a lot of aircraft of some sort. I mean, is there something that could be got out of that little base, coming up around your area, just looking around? Because you have to remember, now, we go back to this whole event on the 31st. There were, because a lot of people don't know this, there are 8 people that had seen the lights over the highway where you and your friend were and had your experience. Now, these people didn't know you. These people are all independent around the area. But when they, because I was getting all these reports, and they reported these lights around this area. So that there's good confirmation that something took place. Not only that, there were green lights being seen. This is away from the 31st sighting, or your experience, around the Kelowna area, Okanagan, all over the place, flying around the mountains, hovering, shooting up in the sky, over top of the mountains, down in the valleys. Some of them were dropping down. I heard there was even one fire caused by supposedly a green light. It wasn't a meteor. So there was all kinds of stuff happening. So is it a possibility that somebody knew what was going on, and I'm sure they would, and were watching the area, and still to this day, if Well, for example, down there, I know that you had a support group. I don't know if it's still running right now.
I started a support group, yes,
right.
After
it was yours,
the experience, yes.
Right. So there were a number of others around the area that, of course, attended, and they were going through experiences of some type. So is it a possibility there was, because there was so much happening in your area that, and of course I would say the military had to have been aware of what was going on, and they were having somebody keeping an eye on it, and this is why that's a possibility. You've seen the helicopters, your daughter's seen the helicopters. I think you've seen them before.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
oh, yes.
So
it wasn't the first time.
That's right. So this is there's just so much in that area. I haven't received so much like in for 2005, a little slowed down 2004, but the two years in a row, that was crazy. So I really do believe that they were keeping an eye on something down there.
Well, I'll tell you, Brian, your guess is as good as mine.
Exactly.
But I have to say to you that on different occasions through our lives, the children and I have been buzzed, as they say, by jet black helicopters with blacked out windows.
Yeah, gotcha.
And we have no idea who they are, where they're from. We are almost more terrified of those than we are of anything else.
Right.
And I don't know why. I can't give you an answer for that.
Exactly.
But they really bother me.
That's right, because you can't get an answer. That's right.
Well, they usually happen after something has happened to us through the night, or we've had a sighting.
Right, exactly.
And it's not in our imaginations. My goodness, I mean, we've had more witnesses to some of our sightings and things that have happened to us than we can shake a stick at.
Yep.
I mean, you yourself from the July 31st, 2003 incident have how many witnesses now? What happened to us?
There was eight for sure, like we said earlier, and there was a ninth. I've never talked to the ninth, but there was definitely a ninth, and I never ended up getting a hold of them or whatever.
If we keep staying like ostriches and keep putting our heads in the sand and don't try and face this thing and get answers, we're going to keep living in fear and ignorance. We have to put the pieces together. We have to figure out what's going on here.
There have been some indications in other cases, very interesting, where the person who didn't know much about the phenomenon would say, I think something happened last night. And the other thing that's strange is that these black helicopters were roaring through the valley this morning. We've never seen those before. I wonder why they're circling our house. And they hadn't even explored the experience, but, it gave me the feeling sometimes that there was some kind of surveillance. Certainly when we know that satellites can read newspapers from space, that some of these objects just might be tracked somehow, and they might know where they're going.
In Maryland, there have been several of us involved with the investigation of a case of a woman who last June was waked up with a pulsing blue light coming through the shades in the bedroom. It's a very small house. I've been in this house. And for some reason that's still not clear, she never opened up the shades. She did go to the doorway to see in the living room, and she could also see the light pulsing there, but she never made any aggressive action to go out of the house or anything. But the next morning, there was a 14-foot diameter circle in the front yard, which we did get soil samples from. We were able to find that there were some very strange biochemical changes actually in the seed in the grass. And she began to have helicopters of, we think, military nature, over the house on such a regular basis that a MUFON investigator went with a camcorder, videotaped this. There were other researchers who would be on the telephone with her, and all of a sudden the phone, they couldn't even talk on the phone because the sound in the house was so loud. One day, feeling like she was going out of her skin, she said, I'm going to forget all this. I'm going to lie down on a chair in the backyard in the sun. I'm going to make this all go away. And she was lying, feeling relaxed for the first time in a while in the sun, and she said it was like somebody leaned over her and the shadow came across her face and her head. And she opened up her eyes expecting to see her husband leaning over her. And she said approximately 10 feet above her was a helicopter. And the helicopter, she said, was all beige. And she said she couldn't see through the windows. And she was going on in these minute details about this helicopter. And I said, well, the sound must have been horrific. And she said, well, there wasn't any sound. And I said, well, things must have been blowing. This is 10 feet above you. She said, no, it was very still. Well, that is not a helicopter, as I understand helicopters in terrestrial terms, interacting with air molecules. So, again, we've got this camouflage, I don't know what it is, where this thing was, she thought, a military helicopter. Well, interestingly enough, one of the investigators in Maryland began doing some research through a congressman. And they were able to push this case actually to some agencies, and they got back a response that there was a classified national security reason for why helicopters were in that neighborhood, and they would not define it. And that's as of a couple of months ago. But we don't know what more. She still has helicopters over the house. But I think there's an example of hearing and seeing real helicopters, and then what was this thing 10 feet above her on the back porch? Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just make a brief comment about this. It's a hard question to answer because it seems to be very complex. You'll have one witness over here who's having experiences with grays, never saw a government person or helicopter their entire life of experiences. Another person that seems to be involved with a group exactly like this other woman is harassed continuously by helicopters, government people. Sometimes they're even abducted, maybe by the government, and interrogated or examined to see what the aliens were up to, maybe, who knows. And then you have other cases like what Bill talked about, where the government and the aliens seem to be working together. What the hell does this all mean? You know, I mean, we have 3 different groups with 3 different motives, and they just happen to look alike? You know, maybe. And when does the government get involved? Are they understaffed? Maybe they just can't handle all the abductees. You know, I don't know. But it seems like all those kind of scenarios may be going on.
What's your take on, have you heard of black helicopters?
Yep. I filmed them.
Okay. Could you elaborate, please?
Well, the one that I filmed, I have a picture of a helicopter pilot say they can't understand it because it's been modified in such a way that it should not be able to get off the ground.
The helicopter.
Yep.
San Luis Valley, back to Colorado, where the cattle mutilations occurred. That's a hotbed for black helicopters.
And that's the police believe it's the black helicopters doing the mutilations.
You think it's somebody in those black helicopters?
Right.
Now the question is, are they government or are they aliens manifesting? Are they aliens manifesting themselves as black helicopters?
I don't know who they are, but they're not government. Why would they go around doing that?
Right, because they could have their own little farms and experiment on their animals to their heart's content.
Right.
So that would leave up an option. And Chris O'Brien, I made this inference to him. He's a researcher in the San Luis Valley. What if the UFOs could manifest themselves as black helicopters? Let's just say, if an incident...
That's it. See, now you're going to do a totally different area.
Oh, let's go. We're there.
I've got a picture that I took in daylight. I looked up, I was out in my area, and I'm with a friend, and I look up, and I saw a plane and a helicopter flying side by side.
Was the plane a C-130, had 4 engines on it? What type of plane was it?
Just a plane on a helicopter.
Okay.
And those two attracted my attention. And I got a Polaroid camera. I snapped the plane and the helicopter. You don't see planes and helicopters flying side by side. I snapped the picture, and I got a disc and a flying barrel, along with a plane and a helicopter. So lately, over the years, also I have a friend who filmed a carrier letting off, looked like small planes, like the old planes, like World War I planes. I think something like 8 of them came out of the carrier.
And they looked like almost like rolled. It was 5
Old planes.
Interesting.
And so, and then
UFO.
also, yeah, and then also we had here what we call the crazy plane.
What's that?
It looks like a plane.
Okay. And
it will do things like it'll come right straight down from the sky.
here, meaning southern New Hampshire.
Yeah, roaring, worse than 10 jets. Come right straight down, pointed at the ground, stop about 20 feet, flatten off, up, and take off.
Do you think that's an alien craft or?
I know it is.
Okay, sure. So
they're beginning to disguise themselves.
That's okay. So
they're beginning to look like things that were familiar to us.
Right.
So that they can get in closer.
A good Chris O'Brien story was he had investigated this strange helicopter encounter of a family in Colorado, saw this strange yellow helicopter. And it's so expansive to travel in that helicopter, you wouldn't have enough fuel to go to the next depot. And so he's driving home and he's typing it up on his typewriter the next morning, and he looks out and he sees the same yellow helicopter 13 years later, the way they describe. Now, I want to get back to special operations groups. I mentioned them earlier. They emanate out of Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. They're trained there. They're dispatched, or I call them their nest, is at Eglin, Hurlburt Field. Black helicopters are shiny or flat black helicopters that are not registered with the FAA. They don't have any military numbers or markings, so they don't exist. You can fly at any altitude, anywhere you want. They also are accompanied by 4-engine planes called C-130s. They can be, the way I look at it is, it's the United States of America's way to check into the terrorist game unannounced. You fight terrorism sometimes, unfortunately, with terrorism. These are surgical teams that can get into an area, perform whatever duty they have to do with electrical intelligence or PSYOPs against the enemy, and leave. So now for the aliens to manifest themselves, you have UFO sightings, and these special operations groups would show up later. So now it seems that the aliens may be, or so I've heard, manifesting themselves as these black helicopters, almost in a mocking manner. What do you think of that? To the point that here's your secret group, and okay, yeah, the UFOs come in and manifest themselves as black helicopters, because you're inferring that these UFOs have the capacity to manifest themselves as some of our sensitive aircraft. Is that correct?
I don't know. I do know this. I've talked with military. Now, in war times, we used black helicopters. Mm-hmm. Now, after Vietnam, all the helicopters came back, and they were repainted to go to the different branches of government, the military that they'd been assigned to. And there were no black helicopters. But I assume we probably had them when we attacked Iraq. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in other words, black helicopters are great. They're great instead of scrambling fighters to investigate UFOs. You can get a chopper up out of anywhere, get it to the area, investigate. They're usually a few days late, or a few hours late, anyways, and leave. But that you've seen you've heard of odd terrestrial aircraft that you and I know as terrestrial aircraft behaving in strange manners. Like you said, that this woman who saw this UFO releasing circa World War I vintage aircraft.
Yep.
It's a new phenomenon.
And she actually got some real good pictures of one of them, because one of the small planes flew right down towards her.
And it looked just like.
And you could see the two heads. You know, it had like the canopy, like the old planes had, and you could see the head because you couldn't see the features or anything.
Do you believe that there?
And this was filmed in daylight.
Compounding the mystery are the strange helicopters that Bonnie spotted over the ranch. She noticed the first one a few days before the steer was mutilated. With a large military base nearby, Bonnie is very familiar with their aircraft. She could tell these choppers were different.
And then about 2 or 3 days after the incident, I seen another helicopter looked exactly like the first one, flying extremely low, all by itself, and more of a gray-green color than a camouflage color if it was military. But military doesn't fly low like that. They fly their trips and then they're out of here. But this one was extremely peculiar because it flew real low and the odd shape of it.
As strange as they seem, the events on the Martin Ranch do not surprise George Knapp, a television journalist who has been reporting on cattle mutilations, UFOs, and other unexplained phenomena for 7 years.
This case is virtually identical to cases that I've investigated all over the country and which have been reported all over the world. Same symptoms, no tracks, no blood in the animal, no blood on the ground, no signs of struggle, no one hears anything, no suspects have ever been caught or arrested, and we just don't know who's doing it.
In the tiny town of Fife, Alabama, cattle mutilations have practically become an epidemic. Over 40 have turned up in the past 2 years. Rancher Ricky Blackwell found one of his cows dead last winter.
The day we found our cow, it was laying right in here at the edge of the woods, It had 3 incisions, and one was around his milk sac and his flank, about the size of a basketball. The other one was his vagina, was about the size of a softball, and then his upper lip was cut out.
Just like Bonnie Martin in Nevada, Ricky and his friends spotted a mysterious helicopter just before they found the carcass.
From what I could tell, it didn't have any marks on it. Nothing, no numbers, no nothing. It was just solid black, just sitting and hovering. It hovered for at least 30 minutes over in that spot.
And when we got out here, after we found the cow, we wondered, reckon it had anything to do with it, because it's flying kind of back in this area here.
The residents of Fife are a little more cautious than they used to be.
Carry a gun where you spot everywhere you go now. Like they say, the helicopters better watch out around here. They're going to get shot down if they come zooming in.
Less than an hour away from Ricky Blackwell's pasture, Tommy Cole found one of his cattle mutilated. The pattern was all too familiar.
His penis had been removed, and also his rectum had been removed. I knew immediately it was not an accident, and I knew that it was not animals. I've had many animals to kill cattle here, in the past. I've seen them and seen the conditions of the cattle when the animals had torn them apart and killed them, and this was absolutely different. And I found out right quick that no particular person had been seen in the pasture in that area, but that a helicopter had been seen in the area of the pasture and had landed inside the pasture right near where this steer was found.
Who or what could be responsible for these mutilations? Although Tommy Cole is a police detective, he is still baffled.
My theory is that it's some sort of an experiment going on that I can't nail down. I've done a lot of investigation on this and put a lot of time and work in it, but I have not been able to come up with any specific person or persons that's responsible for it.
Back in Fife, another professional investigator is searching for answers. Former policeman Ted Oliphant has personally looked into 35 mutilations.
I've heard a wild variety of theories about what the helicopters are doing with the cows. Some say it's genetic experimentation, or they're testing toxins on animals, or pesticides, or something like this, or perhaps the effect of high voltage lines over the animals. There's a lot of different theories, but none of them convince me.
Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is the location of the Phillips Laboratory. Encounters was allowed to bring cameras into the restricted laboratory to shoot an experimental project called the Laser Med Pack.
It's a completely self-contained laser system that was built for combat medics to use out in the field for 3 things, basically: cutting, coagulating, and closing wounds. Because if you're cutting in vascular tissue, you actually induce a lot of bleeding, and the laser prevents that from happening. You actually cauterize as you cut, and you get a very clean, dry cut.
We asked Captain Kiefer whether or not he was aware of reports linking his experimental laser with cattle mutilation.
I've heard them in tabloids dealing with UFOs, but that's about it. Yeah. I don't think that would be a kind of a viable experiment of any sort.
The research director of UFO magazine also dismisses the idea that military lasers are responsible for these mutilations.
They certainly could have been used, but it's my personal opinion that they weren't used. If they did have some type of operation involving cattle, why would they chance going into the civilian community when they could do it on their own military reservations with complete impunity?
So if not the military, then who?
Cattle hemoglobin has been proven over the years through refinement processes as being suitable for use as blood plasma for human beings in the event of some type of an emergency through a refining process. And because the fact that cattle chromosomes are very close to human chromosomes, the idea has arisen that perhaps, if in fact it is an aspect of the overall UFO phenomenon conducting these operations, then perhaps they may be going after the cattle in an attempt to answer questions about human beings.
But to ranchers like Frank Martin, whose herd is now 1 cow short, nothing makes any sense.
If it's truly aliens and they've got these vaporizing capabilities, why not just vaporize this puppy? And the next day I walk out to count the cows, and instead of having 35, I got 34, and you scratch your head and wonder what's going on. If it's government, they could raise their own cattle. I got no answers. I don't have any answers for those kind of circumstances. But it is strange. strangest things that ever happened in my life.
In more than half of the Alabama cases, farmers report seeing an unmarked helicopter leaving the scene just before or after a cattle mutilation.
They had a chopper in behind my barn. Had all my cattle rounded up in behind the barn. The chopper, when it appeared, it was kind of unordinary. It looked like it's sitting on a box, you know. Of course, it was big enough to get a cow in, you know. If they catch them hovering over their cattle and pasture, I'd probably shoot him. Probably shoot him.
Loud helicopter noise, sounded like it was right over the trailer. Went out the front door, went over to my car, returned the seat, pulled out a handgun. I walked towards the edge of the trailer. I saw the helicopter. It's a light blue helicopter, no markings, no numbers, and it was hovering about 15 foot above the tree. I dropped my holster, and the helicopter veered off.
I think the greatest mystery of this case is the lack of physical evidence that we found at the sites. Only in one case did we find that white flaky material. We haven't been able to find footprints, we haven't been able to find tracks or wheel marks or anything to indicate that anybody's even been in there. How do you explain that? We can't.
My tendency to believe is it's something of a lot higher intelligence than what we've got in normal everyday occurrence around here.
Don't really have any ideas who could be doing it or the reasons behind it, you know. You could get most of the parts they removed from a slaughterhouse for free, you know.
Yes, sir, I run a meat processing plant, and I made a statement that I would donate them jawbone, the blood, their rectum, and whatever, you know, if they just asked me for it, and then they wouldn't have to kill these farmers' cattle like they do.
Despite the willingness of the ranchers to cooperate with authorities in a larger scale investigation, most government officials are sticking to the predator theory. They do not believe that high tension lines in the area are somehow related to the mutilations. They also deny charges that the government is mutilating cattle in order to support new technology, replacing human blood with bovine blood. And what about the unmarked helicopters? Do they point to the existence of a conspiracy?
I think the helicopters are doing the same thing we're doing on the ground. I think they're investigating who's doing this. They're trying to find out too. And because of their behavior, it's obvious that they'd rather have us think that they're doing it than what's actually happening.
Whoever or whatever is responsible may never be known. The silent testimony of these mutilation victims has not been able to resolve the mystery.
At that time of the mutilations and later on, we saw many lights up in the sky. We could not interpret where they were coming from.
Whenever these mutilations occur, there was always a sighting of helicopters around the area.
In a lot of cases, strange lights have been seen around mutilation sites, and most often, helicopters are seen in and around mutilation sites. It's like someone is monitoring these areas where these animal deaths are occurring. People ask me, why are they leaving these carcasses lying around these pastures? I think these carcasses are taken and then returned is somehow to instill fear in the rancher.
What are they up to here? They're obviously, this is a deliberate, this is a high presence. I mean, they're letting everyone know.
I know.
That they're here. They're going over the panel. You've got a nice picture there of them going over the circles. I'll try and
I wonder who's watching what?
Who's watching who?
Yeah, what was that?
You see, he's got monitoring equipment. Look at that. He's coming down there. He's landing on that crop circle.
Alton Barnes, a couple of years ago, when there was a symbol that looked a little bit like the CBS television network symbol, looked a little bit like that, in the field, in Eastfield, Alton Barnes, England. I arrived there with a number of researchers, scientists from this country, a French researcher working for the US government, a number of people that didn't want to be particularly seen publicly. They just felt comfortable to be behind the scenes rather than up front. And I say this for a reason, because we arrived there and the scientist from this country, the Frenchman, is filming with his own domestic camera. We already had an army helicopter so close, unbelievably close, and dangerously close, above our heads. all the guys inside that helicopter are filming us, we're filming them. The whole thing that we thought we were experiencing was the military don't want us here. And we got out of our vehicles, we start filming them. There's the crop circle here. And as this helicopter eases back a few feet, a second one swoops in behind him, comes right up, almost hit the hill. The edge of the rotor blades were within 2 meters, the width of this table and no more, from hitting the hill that we were on. And I mean, of course, what is going on here is the obvious question to ask. Well, what we did is we jumped back in our vehicle. There's about 5 or 6 of us, still filming. We go up the hill, and running parallel is one of the Gazelle helicopters following us up the hill like this.
Right, let me get this here. We can get a picture of him in front of that.
Oh, yeah. Crop circle right to our right.
Right there.
Okay, hop out.
Hop up.
We get out again, and the guy that's got the camera in his hand is filming the field itself. This helicopter breaks away, goes to the back of the field.
I think there's something there. In front of him, there's something. I don't know what it is.
And the little ball of light that he's going straight towards.
Oh, over there? Yeah, some thing over. He's offering right over it. Oh, what's that?
You can see their
What's that?
faces.
There's something flashing on the ground.
Under it?
No, under the tail.
Oh, yeah.
You see it?
Under the tail?
I do.
That's their normal light, isn't it?
No, it's on the ground. It's on the ground under the tail. Like.
I would imagine that the second helicopter, the large Gazelle, is radio communication, and he's probably saying to this guy, it's behind you. Because you can see, the reason I say that is that the ball of light is gone. It was in front of him. It's now, we can see it, and we're filming it. It's behind him. But the helicopter begins to back up. So he's got some direction, something, I guess the other guy is saying it's behind you.
He's hovering right over it now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Does that move? The white,
Yeah, right. Good eye.
He's backing up. He's coming over it like this. He doesn't know whether to turn his helicopter on its axis or literally to keep backing up. He backs up, and that ball of light is right in front of him. He cannot miss it. And again, just like that, one frame of the film, it's gone.
There's stuff flashing there. Can't see anything. Ah!
It's coming up behind us here.
Really get this shit to us. I know, we're trying to divert our attention from our flashing.
Do you think that? I kind of think that. What? They're diverting our attention. Yeah, it could be.
The flashing thing is not there anymore.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any rational sense. But anyway, the balls of light have been seen and filmed now on many occasions.
Speaking of helicopters, actually, and balls of light, you know, I've seen and photographed military helicopters chasing balls of light across cornfields and across this landscape. It's extremely interesting. On one particular occasion, myself and my partner, we sat in a circle formation near Silbury Hill, Avebury, 1999, and watched 2 balls of light appear near a copse of trees near a particularly sacred site named the Sanctuary. before it got dark, probably about 10:30 in the evening, before it got dark, 2 balls of light appeared and just hung in the sky and just gently moved around, done not much, and they hung around there for like until it got dark, more or less, and sometime shortly thereafter, one large, heavy military helicopter, something like it's a kind of like a heavy gunship of some kind, American-looking, tore past us like really fast. I've never seen a helicopter going so quick. And it's really odd. Once it reached, you know, headed directly for the location where these 2 balls of light were doing something. And as soon as it happened, these balls of light blinked out and blinked on over a woods about, it must be at least 6 miles away. It was like instantaneous, you know, like on. These helicopters just scouted around the area for a bit and took off as fast as they had arrived. And as soon as they had gone, the lights just blinked right back into the original position. We thought we were kind of watching or observing a formation going down that night, but you know, as soon as it got light in the morning, about 4 o'clock, we took off, went over there, and nothing to be seen. Even though the following night there was a formation there. So, who knows? We've kind of speculated amongst ourselves that possibly sometimes an actual large geometric shape could be imprinted in the crop without the crop actually going down in, and then maybe at some other later date, you know, so maybe something just comes along, activates it, and the whole thing goes down in seconds. Who knows?